This is March 30, 2022, and this is an oral history interview with Tim Fleming of KGLO Radio. I am Paul Yeager, joined with producer Cliff Brockman. And Tim, let's begin. You are in the radio office in Mason City. We'll get there soon enough, but let's start in Dubuque, Iowa, your hometown. Radio is broadcasting is in the family genes. Was there any doubt you were going to do anything but broadcasting, radio, communications when you were a young man?
No, there was never a doubt. Not at all. I knew very, very young that I wanted to be a broadcaster. My dad was a broadcaster, and that meant that every night Dad was out broadcasting, doing minor league baseball with the Cleveland Indians minor league team as a little kid. We were hanging out at the ballpark with, guys like Davey Nelson and Joe Rudy and some of these guys that went on to become great Major League Baseball players. And from there, I knew that it was kind of fun just to get into the ballpark or go see the local high school games. And Dad just said hello to people as he walked in the front door. He had the best seat in the house. It was something that I thought for sure. And my favorite story about that is knowing that I wanted to be a broadcaster when I was a freshman in high school. You know how they give you those little quiz things? Okay, put down your top 10 list of what you want to be when you grow up. Well, I put down radio. I did 10 radio, and I passed it in. I'm the first one to turn it in, and the teacher says, "You can't do that. You need to put down other careers." And I said, "I don't want another career. This is what I want to do." "Well, you have to put down." I said, "Well, I don't want to be a fireman. I'm never going to be smart enough to be a doctor. I'm going to be in radio. This is what I want to do." So I had to put down different things on that list. And then I put a little asterisk by 9 of them. And at the bottom, I put, "I really don't want to do these." And so here I am all these years later. I'm still a radio broadcaster.
Still are. What was your father's name?
My dad's name was Pat Fleming, and Dad was a Hall of Fame broadcaster himself in all his great years. And I always said that someday I would hope that I could be as good as he was. Never happened, but I strive for that every day, and it's something that was really something for me to look up to, really, as a broadcaster, and to have him to lean on was a great thing through my career.
Was he at KDTH?
Actually, he was at WDBQ for, I want to say, 13, 14 years. Left the broadcast business for a short time and went into the hospital business at Mercy, and then went to KDTH, and he was sales manager of both of those radio stations, and did sports play-by-play, which is where I grew up. I mean, I did my first play-by-play with my dad.
How old were you?
And that's, people ask me that all the time. I said, I don't know if I was 15 or 16, 17. I don't know. I was pretty young. I can remember the first time Dad did it to me. He at halftime, I was running down some stats at a football game, and he had always joked. He said, "Well, listen, you got to do play-by-play sometime." And so he came back and opened up the second half, and he said, "And now with the second half play-by-play, here's Tim Fleming." And he stood up and he walked away. I was at Dalzell Field in Dubuque. I can remember like it was yesterday. And I paused for a moment and said, "Thanks, Pat. And here's the opening kickoff for the second half. It's high end over end kick, return to the 20 or whatever it was." And so I just jumped in and took off and went for a while. And he came back and rescued me after a short time, which was good. But it was fun.
I think that's
a short time.
That's the same story that Joe and Jack Buck tell. I think that's the same thing. And, Jack came back from the inning, introduced Joe, and then walked out of the booth. So were you scared at that moment?
Not really scared. No, I had been around my father all of these years. I think about traveling to games as we were kids. I learned a lot about the broadcast business, and I learned a lot about coaches. And and things too, because a lot of the coaches would travel with my dad, and especially the minor league baseball managers. And so, no, I really wasn't. I wasn't scared at all. As a matter of fact, there was another time they needed somebody to do a local high school game on the local cable television access, and they asked my brother Mike, and I told him, he was a year older. I said, hey, Mike, you've got to do this, and then I'll do it with you. And then the two of us did the game together, which was kind of fun. So
now was college, was that something that your dad talked about? You had to go to college? I mean, you went to Wahlert, then you go to Loras. Was there debate of, no, I just want to jump in? Or did he say, no, you need a couple of years of learning some other things?
He always said, listen, you got to follow what you need to do and what you want to do. I always thought that my first love was really to be a professional baseball player. I thought the major leagues would be a calling for me. I could probably hit it good enough sometimes, but oftentimes they'd throw me out because I wasn't fast enough. But it was a game I loved, and I opted to stay at home and go to Loras, try to play a little bit, and then the opportunity came while I was attending Loras College. I had one radio broadcasting class, and I had a professor. I can remember him talking about what was happening in radio at that time. And I remember raising my hand and saying, no, that's not exactly how it works. And he said, please enlighten us. And I said, well, in our situation, this is what really happens. And he said, what is your situation? And I said, well, I work about 30 hours a week at a local radio station. And he said, well, maybe you could enlighten us all, and maybe you could have our work it out so our class could come to the radio station. I said, it'd be great. And we did. I set it up so that they could come to the radio station. At the time, I was filling some evening hours at KDTH. And so the class would come in at 6:30, as I recall. And at 7 o'clock, I'd say goodbye, and I'd walk into the next room, and they could look at me through the window, and I was on the air. And so those are kind of fun things that I did at college. And it was good experience. It was really something that I needed. And I could tell right away that being on a college radio station, while at the same time being at a commercial radio station, while at the same time I was the assistant manager of a men's clothing store in Dubuque, I figured I might as well keep myself going 24 hours a day. And it was a great experience.
So you gave up sleep at an early age, is what you're saying?
I did. I really, really did. It was there was a 1 year period in there where I didn't sleep very much at all, but I wouldn't trade it for anything, because it really gave me kind of the basis for my broadcast career. And Dad always told me, and my mom always told me, listen to what your father tells you, Tim. But Dad always said, know a little bit about everything in the broadcast business, and then fine tune your skills in certain areas. And he was really right on with that, because, there are some times where you have to do things that are out of your comfort zone, so to speak. I mean, in the middle of the night, I wasn't really thinking back then that I would be helping an engineer climb a radio tower to build a partial antenna after it broke in the middle of the night. But I did. I climbed up a tower with an engineer, and we did this in the darkness of night. And by daylight, the radio station was back on the air. Now, I don't want to do that ever again, but it was something that I was able to do.
Can go into your book.
Yeah, it'll be in the book.
What year are we talking here that you're at Loras and you start?
Well, I graduated from high school in 73. So that would have been 73, 74, 74, 75 at Loras. And then right at about the same time, I had the opportunity to either go into radio full time or take a full-time job at managing a men's clothing store in Kansas City. And well, that was an easy choice for me. It all happened within days. And I took the radio job at KDTH, which was a night job. I'd go in at 9 o'clock and I'd work till about 3 o'clock, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Get home at a very late hour, obviously, wake up at 7. And then I would study a little bit and go back to college at Loras and hit a couple classes and then go off to either baseball practice or to the clothing store. And shortly after that, I decided, wait a minute, what am I doing? So I just jumped into radio full time.
Yeah, something had to change. How would you describe the radio station KDTH at that time when you start? What's the staffing like, programming focus, some of your coworkers? What was KDTH still around, but it's a different radio station than it was then. How was it at that point?
It was one of the greatest experiences in the world. There were some talented people, including my father as a sales manager and did some sports, but that wasn't his bailiwick. But Bryce Anderson was doing farm, and Bryce has gone on to do great things in agriculture, broadcasting, and Gary Dolphin was doing sports, and he was doing a midday show or a morning show, a little bit of both. So Dolph was doing the mornings, and we had Jim Hauber, who's still in Dubuque. He runs Great Sounds Audio. Dennis Higgins was on that staff back then, and Dennis is still in broadcasting. He's at KIMT in Mason City right now. I see Dennis all the time still.
And hear him. I heard him for a number of years. He'd say my name. Yes, Dennis. Yes.
It's just it was just a great group of people. Bob Smith and Bob and his wife still do some podcasts. They're over near Milwaukee and are still doing some things. It was just great. But Gordy Kilgore was on the air back then, and it was just a terrific staff. And for a young guy like me, just entering into the broadcast business, it was a fun time because I got to be an on-air announcer. I got to do some sports. If Dolph wasn't doing the play-by-play, I was doing the play-by-play. There were some games we did together. I would travel with him. There were many times we'd be traveling back from a game and we'd be in Gary's car, and he'd say, just drop me off at my mom's house in Cascade. You can keep my car, keep on going. I'll get a ride in the morning, that kind of thing. But it was fun. It was really a fun staff, fun group of people. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. As I look back on it, it was really good.
You mentioned a lot of people. The staff sounded pretty full. Programming wise, was local the focus?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that hasn't changed even till today. And that is, again, I'll mention a lot of things that my father had talked with me about getting into the broadcast business. And Dad always said, just make sure that the focus is always the listener. If the listener is the focus of what you do every day, then you'll be successful. If you become the focus, then the listener doesn't react or interact with you. And so you have to focus on them. So whether you have 2 people in your building or whether you have 42 people in your building, if you keep in mind that one listener out there is the most important person in the world, that they're waking up in the morning or going to bed at night and they want a weather forecast or they want to hear the local basketball game on the radio. I still have people coming up to me telling me they have cassette tapes of games that I did 45 years ago. And that's an exciting, fun thing to have happen. But that's, again, they were important to me. And so from that standpoint, that's the focus. But yeah, the numbers were much bigger from a staff standpoint back then.
KGLO call you, or did you call KGLO?
That's an interesting story too. And a couple of guys that were really influential in my career out here turned out to be great folks, but Jerry Breddy and Frank Yonda came from WMT in Cedar Rapids. And they called my dad in Dubuque. And they brought my mom and dad out here to Mason City, wined them and dined them. They wanted my father to be the head of marketing and advertising, and he knew those guys from way back. And so they came out, and my mom and dad had no interest in coming to Mason City. They were going to stay in Dubuque. And as they were leaving after spending a weekend out here with Jerry, it was kind of funny because I guess my mom says it's a true story. They were walking to the car. Jerry said, "I'm looking for an afternoon announcer. If you know of anybody, could you just send him my way?" And my dad turned and he said, "Well, there's a kid in Dubuque. He's not bad. Maybe I could send him your way." And he just kept walking to the car. And Jerry said, "Well, what's the kid's name?" He goes, "Tim." He goes, "Tim who?" And he goes, "Well, Tim Fleming." And so that's where that started. So we went, he came home and he said, "Yeah, there's a guy named Jerry Breddy that's going to give you a call." And Jerry did. And I don't remember how many times Jerry and I have laughed through the years, and Jerry became just a great friend of mine in broadcasting, just a terrific guy. He and Frank Yonda were wonderful to me when I came here. But I think Jerry told me he tried 3-4 times to get me to come to Mason City, and I it just wasn't right. And we went through the interview, we did everything, wasn't just right. And we were a nice young married couple at the time, and he called and he said, "Listen," he says, "I'm going to call back in 30 minutes, and if you want to come to Mason City, that's going to be my last time." And so I hung up the phone. I said to my wife, Sue, I said, "So what do you think?" And she goes, "Well, our families are both in Dubuque. Why don't we just go? Why don't we just go strike out and be Tim and Sue Fleming and someplace else in Mason City and go do this? Why not? We're young. She's got this little baby named Amy. Let's just take off and go." And so he calls back, and I said, "Hello." And he said, "All right, I'm going to raise it up another, whatever it was, $10 or $20. That's whatever it's going to be." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, 10 more, and then that will be it. And he went up twice. And he said, "So what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm coming." "Okay, $10 more then." And I said to him, I said, and then he started, he goes, "Did you say you're coming?"
Did you say yes?
Yeah. I said, "Yeah, I did. But I really appreciate all the extra. I was coming before you started throwing that around." And we laughed about that. But yeah, and it was a great decision.
What year was this?
It was 1977. So
okay.
this.
You did have a young daughter then. Yeah.
I'm in my 40. This is my 45th year at KGLO.
And so the job was afternoons to start?
Yeah, I came in doing afternoons. And there was no sports when I came. Jerry said, "We'll see what we can do about sports when we get there." And I being the young guy that I was, I just said, "Hey, listen, I have to do some sports." And so when I arrived, I said, I quickly looked and said, "Well, who's doing the NIAC game on Thursday nights?" And the guy that was doing sports at the time said, "Well, no, we got Mason City on, I guess it was Mason City on Friday. So it would have been a Newman game on Thursday. And then a NIAC game was on a Sunday. And he was going to do Mason City Friday and Iowa on Saturday." And I said, "Well, listen, why don't I just do the Newman game on Thursday and then the NIAC game on Sunday?" And so I did that. And a few weeks later, after starting to pick up some of these other games, this guy that was doing sports, a longtime sports guy in town on TV and radio, Tom Anthony, Tom just decided he was going to step over and just become a sales guy. And at that point in time, they handed the reins to me to take over the sports. And so that's how all that came to be. And and Tom's still going strong too at this time. He's out in Vegas and still enjoying life. Busy times, but yeah, it was back then. That was fun stuff.
That's something about your radio station, your area, that I learned it early being in town, is the commitment to local. You just don't hear a lot of radio broadcasts of junior college athletics, and Nyack has, I assume they realize the gift that your station has given them and the outlet to report. Now all these places bring it internally. Why was Nyack for you just seen as an opportunity to get started and prove your worth, or did you feel that was something locally we need to cover?
Oh, I didn't even have to have too much to do with that at all, because I'd always done some Nyack games. But through the years, the number of football players that came off the Nyack fields that went on to play Division I football was incredible. The number of guys that came off the basketball court that went on to become Division I basketball players was unbelievable. And for me, I stepped in and as a very young broadcaster, started doing some of those games. And I realized my first year doing Nyack men's basketball, that was something very, very special. And the town accepted it as something very, very special too, because some of the all-time great athletes at Mason City and around the North Iowa area, they would all go to Nyack to play basketball, and because they wanted that next opportunity to move up. And we saw that all the time. And, you know, the names of Schaefer and McKissick before I got here. And then I remember when I stepped onto the broadcast platform out at Nyack or at Mason City High at the time, they were still playing some games there, but there was a young guy named Ron Angel, and then Ronnie went on and played at Drake University. And you saw those guys at a level that was incredible. They were just very, very talented, but coming out of a town the size of a Mason City or some of the smaller schools around the area, maybe didn't get the looks that some of the others did. And but the brand of basketball, the junior college basketball, and it's still today, I think it is. If there was a junior college basketball game and I wasn't scheduled to broadcast it, you'll still see me at a Nyack basketball game.
Can't shake it.
No, it's great stuff. It is really, really good basketball.
I think you said Tom was doing Hawkeyes. When did you start doing the Hawkeye football thing?
That would have been 1978.
So yeah, 78 is a pretty tough time in Hawkeye football. Why start doing that?
Why? Because you know, when they said, "Hey Tim, you get all the sports, and you're taking over all the sports," and that included Iowa football, and so it was a great time for the Hawkeyes. It was a great time locally in sports here too, because we had a state championship football team that I was calling their games that year with Barry Alvarez as the head football coach. And they had about 9 Division I players on that team. And, you know, it was really, really a special football season. And then you see Hayden Fry and his crew coming in at Iowa. And but it was fun. It was fun to be able to do those games. And then back then, that year in 78, it would have been, it could have been, and a guy that did color with me for many, many years, Eldine Matheson. We had so much fun because we could do a game on a Thursday night with Newman. We could do a Friday night Mason City game, and whether that was on the road or at home, and then turn around the next morning and meet at the airport in Mason City and fly down to Iowa City, broadcast a game, and then come back. Now, there were a few rare games where we even flew back and did a Saturday night Nyack game after doing an Iowa game in the afternoon, which was probably a little bit of a stretch, but those are fun times.
Fly? Who flew you?
We flew, we chartered locally. Yeah. And then when we first started doing games, we developed our own network of stations so that we could travel on the road. And we were doing prior to that, they had been doing some home games and then picking up a feed, whether that was Brooks or Zabel or somebody on a feed from someplace. And then we decided, let's just do all of the games too. And so we would charter locally, and we would fly out of the Mason City Airport. And it might be a flight into Michigan or Michigan State. There were a few flights we had to make a day before. We had to go to Penn State the day before. We had to go to Arizona 2 days before. I remember that very well. But most often it was we'd fly in on the day of the game. Jim Zabel used to just laugh at me. He'd say, "Fleming, I don't know how you do this. We're here to do one game and you got 3 or 4 on a weekend. Well, I don't know how you're doing it."
Well, how did you do it? How did you prepare for all of? I mean, I think of a state tournament doing maybe 5 or 7 games, and you're basically doing that in a week. How did you prepare for everything?
Just like you're talking about, you'd prepare. When a kid gets done with school and he goes to basketball practice and he gets home late, he still has to do his homework. And, I had just come through that period early in my life where I was busy working multiple jobs, going to school, trying to play college baseball, doing all of those kinds of things. So it was go, 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 go. And for me, it was sitting at home at night, filling out football charts for games, for multiple teams. And honestly, the hardest part back then was we didn't have access to the internet. You just couldn't pull up rosters and do all of those things that you can do now. It was a little more challenging because you had to rely on coaches and actual communication from the high schools and junior colleges, things like that, to send you, hey, can you fax me your starting lineup? Do this, do that, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I was going to say the fax machine was probably a big help to getting data a lot earlier, because I can still remember when like the boys athletic association would send out track heat sheets in the mail, and then they started faxing them. So yes, getting you prepared. At what point did you pick up the morning show at KGLO?
Oh gosh, I get asked that all the time, and I really don't remember the exact date. I remember how it happened.
How did it happen?
Part of my job with Jim Ingstead Broadcasting, Jim bought the radio stations from BY Communications, Brady and Yonda sold, and I started doing a little bit of consulting work with them within various other stations if they needed me to go someplace or work on something. I did that too, along with what I was doing in-house as an operations manager. And I can remember we had a meeting, and there were several of the managers and so forth that were meeting in Fargo. And so we were up in Fargo, North Dakota, and just sitting around having dinner one night. And they were talking about the morning show. And I think it was somebody said, "Tim, you'd be perfect doing the morning show on KGLO." And I joked, "Oh, you guys don't have enough money for me to do the morning show," or something crazy like that. And I think it was, I don't know if it was Kevin or Jim or somebody said, "You want to bet?" And I went, "Oh," he said, "We need to start talking." And so from there, they started talking. And but I think by the time I got back to Mason City, I had agreed that we were going to do that. We were in the process of, we had a longtime morning guy, one of the great morning guys on radio in KGLO history, Bob Brown. And Bob was dialing it back. And he was ready. He was ready to do a 10 to 2 or a different kind of a shift. And so they talked me into doing it. And so all of these years later, I don't know that it was something that I thought that I would do forever, but it's turned out fantastic because it offered me the chance to be up in the morning. And I've always said sleep is way overrated. So I could be up early in the morning, I could broadcast games at night still. Okay. But then on top of that, if my kids had any other activities that they were involved in, and Amy and Eric and Kimberly, they were always involved in something. And whether that was me going to their games or broadcasting some of their games, I was able to do some of that still, while still being up early in the morning, and just my day was a little disjointed, and probably still is in a lot of ways, but I still enjoy it.
Well, I'd see you in West Des Moines on doing a Friday night game, and I knew that you'd had a long week of getting up early, and you were still not getting home until 1 or 2. And I remember talking to Amy about that. I go, "How on earth does your dad do that?" She goes, "He just always has." So, did your father ever call any of your games like you have called your kids' games?
No, I don't recall that he did. I remember, and back then I was really only as a varsity player in high school. I started a few years in high school as a baseball player. Um, I wasn't I wasn't good enough to be a basketball player or anything else, but I sure loved the other sports. But no, he never had a chance to broadcast my games.
So what was it like when you got to do your kids' games?
It was pretty special, honestly. But I always told the kids, and I didn't do all of them or a lot of them. There were some of them I stepped back away from because I knew they were going to be too big a game, and that I didn't know how I would be able to wander my way through such a thing. But there were some times I can remember specifically telling the kids that when they did something good, I would probably just make it sound pretty average in the broadcast. Where somebody else, if they did something good, they probably got a little extra punch in the play-by-play. But if they did something spectacular, then it would show in my voice, my inflection, whatever. Because I told them, I said, if whenever you're in the game and doing something, if you get me so wound up, they're really going to think I'm a homer on the radio, and I'm not. I just call the game, and it's been kind of fun too, because I even had a chance to call my granddaughter's games.
Yes, I was going to bring that up. Yes,
and that's honestly, that was really, really cool. And I did a lot of her basketball games, which was really fun. I did some softball games with her pitching, and it's great when your family member is out there and things go right as a team. But now think about it: the microphone is on, and you're talking, and they lose. You still have to be a professional about it, and the game goes on, and afterwards, then you can feel bad about it or whatever. But you just have to balance some of that. But it really is exciting. It's something that most people don't get a chance to do. They just don't get that chance, and I relish that opportunity.
Your family conspired, along with some coworkers a few years ago, to nominate you for the Jack Shelley Award, and you won. When I remember seeing the video being revealed who it was, I'm like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Tim, your involvement in the community. I know Amy has always talked about, I think you used to work Thanksgiving, as the family would cover all these shifts at the radio station. So everybody else could go be with their family at Thanksgiving. So you were able, how did you mix family and professional radio and professional life and community spirit, whether it's at the Salvation Army or serving at the soup kitchen? How did you, and why was that important to you to mix all those together?
I think it goes back to, when I was talking about the listener being first. And when you think about serving at the community kitchen on Thanksgiving, or ringing the bell, on Christmas Eve, which, by the way, we still do. Every Christmas Eve, as a family, we rang. I just think it's important to give back. I do. We don't, we can't go through life thinking that much of ourselves that, gee whiz, we can't give back. And so I think that's important for us. I really do. As broadcasters, we have a voice. How we use that voice is totally up to us. At the end of the day, we can pack it up and not be involved. But I just always thought it was important to be involved. I think of a story, and I reflect back to my family so much, and it had an impact. There's no question. I remember one holiday at my house, and I remember saying to my mom, okay, when my dad cooked like a Thanksgiving or a Christmas meal, there were multiple turkeys and multiple big things going on. I can remember saying to my mom, where did Dad go? And where did all the leftover turkeys go? What's going on? And he took it down to the Salvation Army. And I always thought, if you're going to give back, there are different ways to do that for people. Some people can just flat write a check. They can do that. Some people can volunteer to do that. Some people could be idea people. And I probably would fall somewhere in that category. I can help be idea people and one of those kind of guys. So to be involved it's just been part of, I guess, who I am. I think if you're going to be in a community radio station, you need to be in the community. At one point in time, I know I've served on a lot of boards and a lot of committees. I always tell people I never thought I'd be a Girl Scout, but I was. I was a Girl Scout board member. I was on the RSVP board. I'm still a Salvation Army board member. I was a school board member at Newman Catholic for 7 years in that system. I've just always tried to be involved in a lot of those things. And usually if somebody in the community says, hey, Tim, will you? Pretty good chance that I'm going to say yes. And it's almost a running joke in our family because they know that I probably will say yes. So
is part of the community commitment the reason you stayed at KGLO? Because I'm sure people called and said, Tim, hey, how about this job? Why stay?
Oh, there are probably a couple of those calls that were made. No, I know there were a couple of those calls that were made. And I won't even get into those calls. I will say part of the reason, if not all of the reason why I stayed here at KGLO was family, was community. And I think through the years, as the radio station evolved and it changed hands, I was just telling someone here recently, I've gone through several ownership changes of the radio station. And each time the radio station was sold, in essence, I had to reapply for the job. So a new owner comes in, they could come in and say, well, that Fleming guy, we don't need you anymore. If they wanted to do that, they could. But I was really able to change jobs a number of times through my career and not leave my office. And so there's some comfort in that. But once your family becomes entrenched in a community, that's where it becomes difficult. And even when I was doing more consulting work with other radio stations, if I was traveling to a station in Minnesota or different places in Iowa or wherever I was going to sit and talk programming or whatever with their staffs and whatnot, it was still all about me being involved in doing the things that I needed to do in radio, be on air, do sports. I love consulting. I love the management part of the business. I love doing all of those things. And I could still do all of those things and still have a family that really enjoyed being in the community. So yeah, I think the community, and all of that tied together.
And I think that's part of why I think you were nominated and ultimately won the Jack Shelley Award. What did that say to you when you won that?
Well, it said to me that they were pretty good at keeping a secret in my family. I'll tell you that, man. As I was sitting at the table, I swear, I was sitting there, and you know how the deal started and going through it and all that, and I thought, well, that sounds a little bit like me. Then I realized, well, for heaven's sakes, that's me. So yes, I was very surprised. I had no idea, but I found it to be one of those great honors in broadcasting. We have some people that I've looked up to and been around in my whole life, and to be recognized and honored by your peers is always something very, very special. And whatever Hall of Fame mentions and all of those kinds of things that come up, those are just important snapshots of your life. And that night you're talking about, that was a pretty good snapshot. That was really, really nice.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot here as we close, Tim. 3 great athletes you've seen in, we'll say, football, boys basketball, girls sports, boys sports. You don't even have to necessarily name them. You mentioned Barry Alvarez already. Dean Oliver comes to mind at Mason City High when the Mohawks were, we're not going to be able to use that term much longer, but what players stand out to you that you were really glad you got to see in person?
Yeah, 3?
I know, because I can think of 3 myself, but from your vantage point.
From my vantage point, well, you mentioned Dean Oliver. He was a special athlete and just an incredible athlete. And Dean, he played on a special team, and so that special team of guys was really something special to win those championships. And so when you mention Dean Oliver, you almost have to mention Mike Peterson and Brant Harriman and all of the guys that went with Dean. But Dean was so good that he was an incredible basketball player. But I always tell people, I don't think it was his best sport. I really don't. I really, really don't. When Dean Oliver played center field on a baseball team, they didn't need a right fielder and they didn't need a left fielder because he could run everything down in the outfield. That was the first time I met Dean, was at my house. Dean and a couple other kids came walking through my kitchen, and I was just coming home, and I said to my wife, I said, what do we have going on here? It was just the local kids getting ready for an all-star baseball team when they were young, and they were with my son Eric, and even back then when they were young kids playing, you knew that he was really, really something special. And so it's fun. It was fun to watch. It's fun to watch Wisconsin play basketball this year. I still watch for Dean on the sideline. Yeah. And,
all right, so that's one. Let's get a couple more as we stall for you to put them.
All right. I don't think there's any question about it. Everybody knows, Jeff Horner has got to be on my list. I mean, he just does. Jeff Horner, I heard a professional baseball scout walk by him and say, when he was coming off the baseball field, listen, if you ever change your mind about playing basketball at Iowa when you get there, let us know. Jeff, too, he could have played anything. You look at the record books at Mason City High School, and in football, in basketball, baseball, Jeff Horner's everywhere. And just an incredible athlete, an incredible person. He's just great kid, great guy. And he's doing terrific right now as a coach. He's just fabulous.
Just like his dad.
Yeah, just like Bob. Absolutely.
And your third.
And this is unfair. Do I get 3 guys and 3 girls?
Well, we got to be fast. We're running out of time here. I got like one more question.
Yeah, all right, okay. Then I'll say the third one would be a tie with a bunch of female athletes.
All right.
I I would have to, how do you break up Jada Buckley and Mackenzie Meyer and Megan Meyer and Maya Melman? I mean, Mason State's had such a great run,
Yeah.
but and then you look back and I think the fun stuff I had broadcasting Lynn Lorenzen when she was on her run,
Over at
scoring all
Ventura.
those points
Yeah.
and doing everything at Ventura. So there are too many athletes
I
to
know.
nail me down for a few.
All right. Last question.
Yep.
What keeps you going? How long are you going to keep doing this?
What keeps me going? The interest in just being a part of the community, and I still think that that's a key for me. As long as I can wake up in the morning and feel like I'm delivering a good product to the listeners, and I made a deal with my wife a long time ago that if she ever turned on the radio and she thought I didn't sound good, to pick up the phone and call me and tell me to come home and don't go back. And so so far so good. I'm still going to work every day and loving every minute of it. And I have no plans for retirement. Listen, it's not heavy lifting. I know some of the road travel I've tried to dial back a little bit in recent years, which that's probably fair to say. But no, I love broadcasting, and I'm not ready to give up the microphone just yet.
I love it. I'm glad I got to get in a couple of words with you, Tim. Thank you.
Great to be with you. Thank you very much.
All right. That is Tim Fleming, KGLO Radio Mason City, the king of North Iowa radio there. And this has been the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting Oral History. And we enjoy each and every one of you who have watched this one. And my thanks to producer Cliff Brockman. This is Paul Yeager on the 30th of March, 2022. Thank you for watching.